Today, 30%, that is the amount of a new tariff President Trump just announced on goods from the European Union and Mexico starting August 1st.
We have always been very clear that we prefer a negotiated solution. This remains the case, and we will use the time that we have now till the 1st of August.
It began with a letter, first to Canada, then to the European Union, and just days later, to Mexico. Each one signed by President Donald Trump. Each one carrying the same message. Starting August 1st, the United States would impose a 30% tariff on goods from its closest trading partners, unless they struck a new deal on Trump's terms. These weren't enemies. These were allies. Longtime allies. And the timing was even more startling. The threats came while formal negotiations were still underway. The result? A diplomatic shockwave rippling across Ottawa, Brussels, and Mexico City.
That all the efforts that the European Commission has made to try to accommodate, try to negotiate a deal, meant nothing for Trump.
This is not the first time Trump has used tariffs as leverage. But this round felt different. The strategy was announced weeks earlier, a new series of reciprocal tariffs, followed by a 90-day pause to allow countries to negotiate. That pause expired this month, and Trump didn't wait. Instead, he began sending out personalized tariff notices, 30% across the board, starting with Canada in early July, and then to the EU and Mexico on July 12th. The message was clear: agree to new trade terms by August 1st, or face higher costs. The tariffs would hit every corner of commerce: cars, electronics, food, medicine. Inside the White House, officials described this as a reset. One economic advisor admitted the president was frustrated by slow progress. With the original 90 deals in 90 days promise slipping, Trump turned to pressure tactics. But this was no ordinary pressure. These were public threats, delivered mid-negotiation, targeting countries that had historically built supply chains with the U.S., not against it.
Well, it shows that Donald Trump thinks he can maybe get a deal by threatening to escalate. But I have to think, I think it will backfire.
The first to respond was Canada. Prime Minister Mark Carney had already set a July 21st target to complete talks with the U.S. But after the tariff letter arrived, he extended that deadline to August 1st, matching Trump's. Rather than retaliate immediately, Canada held firm. Government officials emphasized continued dialogue, even as they warned they would protect workers in key sectors: steel, autos, and especially copper, which had already faced a 50% tariff. In Europe, the reaction was similar. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen confirmed that Brussels would continue talks until the deadline, but she also made it clear the EU was fully prepared to impose countermeasures if needed. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz echoed that view, warning that failure to reach a deal could have serious consequences. According to ING chief economist Carsten Brzezinski, if the 30% tariff is enacted, it could shave off 0.4 percentage points from Eurozone GDP, bringing 2025 growth dangerously close to zero. Mexico's response followed the same tone. Officials called the tariff unfair, but reaffirmed their commitment to negotiations.
On track, since the very beginning, we have worked and now are ready to respond with countermeasures.
And the Mexican officials conveyed that that 30% tariff marked, quote, unfair treatment, and that they did not agree.
We are not alone in this world. We need to be closer to our allies.
What's happening now goes beyond trade numbers or tariff rates. It's about trust. For decades, America's closest partners assumed that policy differences would be handled behind closed doors, not through public threats. Now, those same partners are being forced to choose between accepting last-minute demands or risking economic punishment. Canada has spent years integrating its economy with the U.S., from auto manufacturing in Ontario to copper refining in Quebec. The EU built transatlantic agreements on the idea of stable, rules-based cooperation. And Mexico, long a pillar of the USMCA framework, is suddenly being treated like a problem, not a partner. What Trump sees as hard bargaining, many allies are now viewing as betrayal. With the clock ticking to August 1st, one thing is clear. Trump isn't backing down. But neither are America's allies. Canada is holding the line. The EU is preparing its defense. And Mexico is still at the table. Whether this strategy leads to new deals or a deeper rift will be revealed soon. But one thing is certain. These letters didn't just threaten tariffs. They threatened relationships. And some of those may be harder to repair than any trade deficit.
Another letter has been posted on Truth Social. The president writing to the leader of Brazil, saying that he's imposing a 50% tariff on all imports coming in from Brazil as soon as August. A Section 301 investigation into all imports coming in from Brazil.
On July 9th, 2025, the White House posted another tariff letter, this time aimed squarely at Brazil. A full 50% tariff on all imports, effective August 1st. It's the highest rate announced so far in this administration's latest wave of trade pressure. This move wasn't unexpected, but it was still jarring. For Brazil, it was a direct escalation. For the rest of the world, it was a warning. Especially for nations still in negotiation, or running out of time to get there. Canada and the European Union are both in the room with Trump's team. But they're not safe. They're on the clock. The Brazil letter did more than slap a high tariff. It triggered a formal Section 301 investigation into Brazilian imports, something Trump had used in his first term to justify long-term tariffs on Chinese goods. But what made this letter stand out wasn't the economics. It was the politics. In the post, Trump linked the decision to Brazil's handling of former President Jair Bolsonaro. He called it unfair. He called it a witch hunt. And that made the 50% tariff not just about trade, but about power. Brazil didn't get a negotiation window, it got a punishment. The kind that doesn't start with a phone call, it starts with a headline. And with that, Brazil became the latest example of how this White House is using tariffs not only to correct trade imbalances, but to send political messages.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the EU was working closely with the Trump administration to reach a deal.
Well, in Ottawa, the PMO says Canada's July 21st deadline is serious, and consequences for failing to meet the deadline for Canada aren't known.
While Brazil faces tariffs outright, the European Union and Canada are deep in negotiation, each on a tight, ticking schedule. The EU is pushing hard to finalize a deal before August 1st. European Commission leaders confirmed that talks with the US are active and making progress. Trade Chief Maroš Šefčovič said a joint statement is close. But Italy's economy minister warned, it's complicated. The text may not be finished until the last minute. Canada, meanwhile, is working against a different clock. Prime Minister Mark Carney's team is negotiating under a July 21st deadline, 10 days earlier than Europe's. This special cutoff reflects how Trump's team has chosen to handle Canada separately, after Canada dropped its digital services tax on June 30th to reopen talks. Unlike the EU, Canada is keeping things quiet. No daily briefings, no policy statements, just back-channel movement. And that silence might be deliberate, because in this game, what isn't said can be just as important as what is. Still, both regions are in the same position. Negotiate fast or face tariffs soon. The threat isn't distant. It's set to arrive August 1st. The Trump administration has said over 20 nations could face tariffs in the coming weeks if they don't enter negotiations. On July 10th, the White House confirmed more tariff notices would roll out in phases, targeting sectors like semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and other strategic supply chain goods. This reflects a shift in strategy. The new tariff wave isn't just about trade balances, it's about alignment. Countries seen as moving closer to China could face heightened scrutiny. In that light, Brazil's case stands out. The 50% tariff, paired with a Section 301 investigation, came amid concern over its strengthening ties with Beijing. In response, China has warned that countries signing deals with the US that harm its interests may face retaliation. This is no longer just trade policy, it's positioning in a global contest, and the consequences will be economic. What happened with Brazil wasn't just about one country. It was about setting the tone. Trump is reshaping trade not through global frameworks, but through pressure and pacing. Some countries get letters, others get deadlines. But all of them now face a decision. move fast, or pay the price. For the EU, the calendar says July 31st. For Canada, it's July 21st. For the rest, the time is shrinking, and the tariffs are already written. This isn't just a negotiation anymore, it's a countdown.
President Trump ratcheting up the tariff war with a measure that could be another big blow to Canada. Donald Trump announced a 50% tariff on copper.
Of course, our embassy in Washington is following very closely, as well as the entire team back in Ottawa.
On July 9th, President Donald Trump announced a new 50% tariff on all copper imports into the United States. The policy takes effect August 1st and has already sent shockwaves through global supply chains. But while much of the world is reacting with uncertainty, one neighbor isn't panicking. Canada isn't shouting, it's watching. Because for Ottawa, this isn't just another tariff. It's a test of strategy and of how far Trump is willing to go before Canada decides to push back. In 2023, Canada exported 9.3 billion Canadian dollars worth of copper and copper-based products, according to Statistics Canada. Over half, about 4.8 billion, went to the United States. That trade now sits on the edge of a cliff. Canadian producers fear that if no exemption is reached, their products will become instantly uncompetitive compared to US-based suppliers. Some Canadian exporters, especially those who shifted into copper during earlier rounds of US metal tariffs, now find themselves back under threat. For businesses that rely on the US for a fifth of their sales, the prospect of a 50% tariff could mean lost contracts, layoffs, or even full market exit. This isn't an abstract policy debate. It's the real cost of losing access to a partner that, for decades, served as Canada's largest customer for critical minerals.
If you were to ask Donald Trump that question, I guess he would say he has answered it today in his Truth Social post that he wants to rebuild the American copper industry.
Trump's reasoning is clear: rebuild America's industrial base. In a social post, he framed copper as vital to the future, powering everything from electric vehicles to military systems and data centers. But unlike aluminum or steel, the U.S. still relies heavily on foreign copper. It takes years to build new smelters or expand mining operations. In the short term, manufacturers will face higher prices, and consumers may feel the effects in products that touch nearly every part of modern life. To Canada, this doesn't look like industrial policy. It looks like leverage, a pressure tactic to bring negotiating partners to the table. And the deadline, August 1st, is now a countdown clock for everyone involved.
Being said, every single journalist in the country wants to have more information about the negotiations. The same. We will let the Prime Minister do the negotiation, supported, of course, by our negotiator-in-chief back in Washington, Kirsten Holman, and we will not negotiate in public.
Yet Canada isn't moving publicly. Not yet. Industry Minister Melanie Joly says there is still no executive order, but confirms that Ottawa and the Canadian Embassy in Washington are following very closely. Prime Minister Mark Carney has not responded publicly, a pattern that reflects his cautious, behind-the-scenes style. Canada's lead negotiator, Ambassador Kirsten Hillman, is working in Washington to secure an outcome before the window closes. The government's focus, Joly says, is on protecting workers and supporting companies at the front line of this trade war, from aluminum and steel now to copper. Canada's goal is simple: secure a carve-out, a specific exemption for copper under a broader bilateral agreement. It's not unprecedented. Canada has achieved similar deals in the past. But this time, the pressure is higher. The self-imposed deadline is July 21st. That gives Carney's team less than 2 weeks to finalize a trade and security agreement with the U.S. before the tariffs hit. Donald Trump's strategy is loud. The announcements come via social media, the targets are clear, and the deadlines are firm. Canada's strategy is quieter, but not weaker. Every move is measured. Every response is calculated. As August 1st approaches, the world will watch whether Canada bends or negotiates its way out. In this trade war, timing is power. And while Trump holds the microphone, Carney is holding the clock.